All right. Good morning, everybody. I feel right at home. This feels a lot like my garage because, well, this is the stuff that has been in my garage lately. So, Shalom and the art of building a fence. Large crowds were following Jesus, and he spoke to them. He warned them about the cost involved in following him. And he said, suppose one of you wants to build a fence. Tower is the original text. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you'll have enough money to complete it, and expertise, and time, and skill? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish, or didn't finish well. Measure twice, cut once, as the saying goes. So when I picked fence building for a sermon topic way back in June, it wasn't just because, well, I wanted a fence, and this would be the most self-serving sermon research of all time. I thought, no, this is a chance to really practice what I preach, because I know I'm on record very, very many times saying God is present everywhere, in everything, in all the things we do, not just when we're woke to his presence, not just when we're doing good deeds or churchy activities. No, everywhere is the site, S-I-T-E, of God already moving, acting, inviting us to participate with him in our lives. So knowing I was going to spend some time building a fence over the summer, I felt I could be confident that fence building would be a horizon in which I could encounter and experience God over the summer. And how much more if I actually went into it paying attention to where is God in all of this. So we put it on the sermon schedule, and I thought, what a great opportunity to be an embedded journalist in my own life as building a fence. I'm going to see what God is doing. And the result? Well, a couple of things you should know. I have a complex relationship with DIY projects. The laughter came just a little bit too easily when Matt made that quip. Like, you know already there's some complication there. Anyway, I call do-it-yourself projects real-world projects. So I love building words and paragraphs and ideas and concepts, thinking and abstraction. I love words on a page or on a computer screen or even in conversation where you can go in any direction and you can switch it up. You can build, you can construct, you can change, you can edit, you can rebuild, you can reformulate, you can tear it all down and start again in a moment. But real-world projects are terrible. You measure and you speculate, you have an idea, that part is fine, but eventually those ideas have to manifest themselves into something that's tangible and real and physical, and it's permanent, and so it stands there as a monument either to your great success or your shortcomings. So in a sermon, if I try to describe something and I don't get it quite right, well, that's fine. Ideas are fluid. So I know that either you, with a concept in your own mind, will fill it in or come with a better concept, or it can be revisited, or it doesn't matter. We're talking about God and life and truth, and all of us are seekers together, right? So it's like we're shooting arrows at reality, and some of them miss, but when it hits, we experience that together, and it's good. But with a fence post, when you put it in and it's not level, and it's not fluid. And if it's off by 7 degrees, that 7 degrees is going to affect the straightness of the boards that are attached to it, which is going to affect the straightness of the boards that will be nailed to the following post, especially if that post is perfectly level and straight. And did you know that not all 2x4s are perfectly straight? And that even a 4x4 fence post can have a curve in it that you don't notice until it's concreted 3 feet into the ground. And that gates are tricky, and that the top of a gate and the bottom of the gate can be really close, but just a little bit off. And that's tricky. They're not quite the same. So there's positive things, and I'll get there, but I'm not quite ready yet. I want to name a few other things that make real-world projects a challenge for me. So in my world, first of all, they take forever. Yes, I'm slow, but there's other things. So one is there's weather, right? This has been a wet summer in Calgary. That factors in. Second is I've got other things to do in life. So fence building has to fit into a life where fence building is not the center of that life. But that makes it take forever. When we redid our bathroom upstairs a while back, it was almost a 2-year project, and for over a year we were all showering and using the bathroom downstairs, sharing that bathroom space with 2 teenagers. It takes a long time. So whether I have things to do that aren't fence building. Third, I almost always don't have the tools that are required for the job, whatever the job happens to be. And even if I did, I barely know how to use the tools anyway. This is not a word processor. This is not a blog post. This is saws and nail guns and 2-person augers. Which brings me to the fourth thing, which makes real-world projects difficult and take forever, and that is a lack of skill on my part and experience. A lack of skill and experience. And a lack of tools and skill and experience also means that my dad is on speed dial. And my dad is here today. Hi, Dad. So when I've got questions about cars or plumbing or electric work or fences or most real-world projects, my dad is my first call. And he has tools, and he has built fences before, and if I'm honest, he's done more fence building this summer than I have. And no, he hasn't been working on any other fences other than the one I have. Okay, so I'm almost getting to the positive stuff, but I'm still not quite ready because I need to say the other thing, which is probably the worst thing that I encounter in real-world projects. And that is when you begin and you think it's one thing, it's always something else. It's always something else. You plan out what the steps will be, but when you, in the case of a bathroom, when you open up that wall or you take out that bathtub, you see stuff that you didn't anticipate, and there's always 100 more steps that you need to do first before you can get to those steps that you planned. There's always something else. And the biggest one of these, in the case of building a fence, was gravel. Well, not really gravel, rock, actually, in the ground. I was thinking about this as we sang, "The rocks cry out your fame, let your glory come." I have a whole new take on that line in the song. So one of the first moves we had this summer in building a fence, it was a beautiful summer morning, and my dad came over, and we had the plans drawn up, and we measured out where the fence posts would be. We put stakes down and marked their precise position, and we said, okay, the next step will be to rent a 2-person auger and do some digging. So my dad goes home for lunch, and I suspect my mom's influence might come into play, but the next thing I know is he calls and says, well, no time like the present. Why don't you go get that auger right now? We'll do it this afternoon. So I do go to Home Depot, get a 2-person auger, and we're there to dig out these holes for 4x4 posts, 12 holes in total that we need for the fence. And we're aiming to get it 3 feet deep. So the machine works beautifully. It chews right through roots and everything, and hole number 1 gets to 2 feet, and then we find a bit of gravel, no problem. Hole number 2, same thing, gets there to a little bit of gravel, no problem. We'll scoop that out by hand. Hole number 3, we get to just past a foot, and then we get the gravel already. Okay, that's fine. So we put the auger down, and we're digging some gravel out by hand, but I think, well, this isn't very efficient at all. The auger's on a 24-hour rental. So I text my brothers-in-law, Darren and Ryan, and say, hey, do you want to come over for an hour or two? I've got beer. So they did. But by the time they actually arrived, the situation had changed slightly, because we found that in hole number 3, after that little layer of gravel, there was not more gravel, but there was actually a rock and a large rock as well. And we would find out that this was not the only hole that had this kind of problem. There was lots of rocks. And some of those 4x4-inch holes would become 40x40-inch holes, out of which we pulled boulders, like this one that I recently pulled out that must have weighed more than 200 pounds. I got Jonah to take this picture of me yesterday. I imagined I was going to pick it up for the picture, but it didn't work out that way. I'm not in CrossFit shape. So the auger did not cut through rock. In fact, it had a hard time with some of the thick clay even. that we found in other holes. All that to say, on that particular day, we did provide beer, and my mom and my sisters actually came over with the nieces and the nephews, and we all ended up having pizza and hanging out and having a good time. But my saying, hey, come by for an hour or so, was at least false advertising and probably more like entrapment. But now all this trouble I get for many of you, you're thinking, come on, what's the big deal? We deal with this kind of stuff all the time. Yes, you're people who are used to real-world projects. I know there are you out there, and I get that many of you are like, yeah, just get it done. And I know and I get that there's aspects of the universe I live in which are strange and ridiculous to others, but I also want you to know that I'm not entirely naive. I knew, even in the universe that I live in, that obstacles were bound to come up. I've jumped into projects before. I know that stuff you don't anticipate comes up. I knew there'd be times when I'd be overshadowed with this sense of, why do we not just pay somebody to do this? I don't care. Put it on credit card. Just get it done. Why am I doing this at all? I knew it was possible that we'd come to the end of summer and not have this fence built. And it's not totally built. It's really, really close, though, but it's not totally done. So why do it in the first place? Well, all good action in the world, I think, starts with vision, an idea, a vision. So we live on the corner house on 17th Avenue Southwest. It's a busy street. It's right across from the LRT. Here you see it here. And the yard sort of goes, if you go back and sideways, we have right off the back, there's a deck. And if you go to the left, there's a nice little yard, a side yard that goes towards the alley. Oh, go back one for just a second. Yeah, so now you see here, on the right side, there's 17th Avenue. It's a busy street, so that entire yard, when we moved in, was completely unusable because you have a busy street, and basically all it amounts to is more shoveling in the winter and more mowing for a useless yard in the summertime. Okay, but then what happened, and now you can go to the next slide, is the city built this concrete wall between us and 17th as a sound barrier, and then from the LRT, and then they built a huge 6-foot fence between us and our neighbor's house, also as a sound barrier. That's one of the perks for living across from an LRT station. So all of a sudden, we had a 3/4 enclosed yard, and suddenly we had a vision. Hey, this could be a space where we could actually live in a little bit. We could have a door going the other way off of our deck into this yard, and when little kids come, they could play on the trampoline, and we could put some chairs out there, and maybe we could have a fireplace out there, and our little Izzy dog could run around and have a whole nother place for her to be. So it started as a vision. It started as an idea. I can picture something. I can picture it being a reality. And strange or not, that idea always gets me to do something that I wouldn't ordinarily do. And I connect it with purpose, our human sense of purpose. I start to think about things like the Garden of Eden. What does God put human beings on earth to do? To build a garden and to spread that garden, to create space where there's beauty and life and room for flourishing and where there's shalom. And you might think I'm backloading theology into this project, but I'm really not. I think about these kinds of things, like the fact that the story of Scripture begins in a garden and ends in a city, the picture of human beings building something, creating space for shalom and for life. And in a tiny little way, I felt maybe fence building can be a participation in that reality. So I know I'm going to hate it, but I think let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's start this project. Let's buy the boards. Let's dig the holes, and let's go for it. And I know there's all of you who do this kind of do-it-yourself projects more naturally and readily, and that's a beautiful gift. It really is. And I think that that's why when you've done something, when you finally made something, you look at it that you worked hard over, you look at it and there's a sense of just pride and joy, and not the bad kind of pride, the I'm better than somebody else kind of pride, but the kind of pride that's filled with gratitude that says, I was able to take this journey, and thanks be to God that sometimes those journeys don't end the way we want them to, but this one worked, and I did get that rock out of the ground, and there's maybe 1,000 things that I can't do or I won't do, and I get to see the imperfections on some of the posts, and I'll always see them, but we put those in. We put those in that morning when me and Sherry and Jonah were mixing concrete and digging and measuring and adjusting and getting the level out. And when all the sections were complete on our fence and the gate was on, Sherry and I set 2 chairs outside and sat down with a drink and kind of let the dog run around. And I thought, okay, 17th Avenue is still a little louder than I imagined in my vision world. But it feels good to have created something nonetheless, have a space, something new that wasn't there before. And there are imperfections, but there's less imperfections than I probably would have bet on at the beginning of the summer. But still, I feel good about it because it's a vision that we were able to live our way into. Okay, so my title, Shalom and the Art of Building a Fence, is meant to be a play on the title of Robert Persig's 1974 book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Anybody read that book? Yeah? Okay, so it's basically a book about a road trip and a philosophy book, and it's very insightful. And I thought, well, I'm doing a real world project. I should read a book like this, and it is fascinating because it's quite deep. So here's a little moment that I go on a philosophical tangent, so you can take it or leave it. So Persig talks about 2 ways of looking at the world, or looking at things. Basically, the classic way and the romantic way. And the classic looks at real world stuff, like things and their components and how things work, the details and the function. While the romantic way of looking at things is visionary and artistic and creative, and it doesn't care how things work, it just wants things to work. And is often frustrated when things just don't work like they envision they ought to work. Meanwhile, the classic way of looking at things gets frustrated with some of these artistic visions that have no grounding in reality and how things actually are. So these 2 are often in tension with each other in our world. They don't need to be in tension because what drives them both is something that exists before both of them. That's a priori in philosophical language, which is quality or the good, which drives both artistic visions and real-world activity. Okay, so Persig says that there's a sense in which you don't have to be taught whether something is good or not. You know whether something is good or not almost instinctively. A song, an essay, an idea, a fence. When something is good, there's a good that emerges from, which is beyond description. It's just the good. And according to Persig, that good is the driving force of the entire universe. Okay, so take that or leave that, but here's the part that I take. There is a tension between romantic and classic, and there's a tension between theology and life, between our words and our deeds, between ideas about God and lived reality where we experience God, between spirituality, as we often think of it, and the physical world, between the idea of a yard and actually building a fence. They're not opposed to each other, but it's so often hard to see them in their fullness coming together. And I think that's where it is for me. That's the thing that the gospel addresses. That's what the incarnation of Christ, God becoming flesh, addresses. So I'm talking like this is really deep, but it is really deep, but it's also really simple too. On the one hand, we believe God and love and truth, and we believe that God has to do with everything, and yet oftentimes we don't connect God when we're cleaning the toilet or making a grocery list or working out the math on a spreadsheet or stuck in rush hour traffic. Sure, God means I should be a good person, live morally, and will live with him one day, but there's a sense in which in our daily functioning, we don't need God. We hear his word, how to live, okay, but then he can be absent from our day-to-day living. But the radicalness of the incarnation of God made flesh, our gospel, is that God quits being the God up there or distant from us and becomes God here. God cleaning the toilet, God making a grocery list, God doing the equations on a spreadsheet, God stuck in traffic. First, in the person of Christ, but then by his Spirit in all of us, in all of our lives. So for me, my tendency is often I'm in one mode or the other. Okay, I'm either in God mode or I'm in ordinary life mode. But the incarnation says, no, quit being like that. They're not separate anymore. So even though I experience dread at the idea of engaging real-world projects, my reasons for not wanting to do them are actually the reasons I absolutely should do them. They're exercises in incarnation, sacraments of incarnation. Taking the reality of ideas, of truth, of goodness, these forms that actually exist and can exist just as ideas, and then giving them specific content through the idea of a yard, and then through actual nails that are holding actual boards and pieces of trees to fence posts and creating a fence. And in that, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but in that I see hints of God's risk in and courage in the incarnation of Christ. God who comes at this time in history, in that culture, in that place, in this one human person, Jesus the Christ. And I experience in a minuscule, by comparison, but really felt risk and courage in taking things like measurements and ideas and manifesting them in the real world where they can't be taken back, where there they are. And doesn't God in the incarnation know that it's one thing that he's going to do, but there are all kinds of troubles that will come, and yet he makes himself flesh. He lives where we can touch and see and feel and hear from him. These are reminders to me that God wasn't content with drawing plans for being with us. He manifested it in the real world. The vision and ideas that were spoken by the prophets many years before Christ, God actually didn't just let those exist as plans and ideas and words spoken by prophets. No, he dug holes and he fixed boards and he made it happen so that God up there is now God with us, talking with us, in conversation with us, laughing with us in our eating, in our work, in our fence building. God in a vision of a yard, a space for flourishing. God persevering through my frustrations, limitations, imperfections. God's grace through a dad who's willing to get lots of phone calls, lend tools, and build a fence with me. God's fellowship through brothers-in-law and family who come and got dirty and exhausted so that the beer and pizza was that much better, and that fellowship where God is present. God in the conversation with the workers in the Rona yard where they compassionately say to me, "You shouldn't drive your van with that much wood on it. It's not safe." God's neighboring heart in talking with the passersby who are, what are you guys doing with your arms way down these holes, digging rocks out of that? All of that, God present. And it doesn't matter that most of the time my eyes are closed and that most of the time I'm not thinking about God. Even still, God is present in our lives. He is the present one. But wake us up, all of us, God, to your presence, not just a good idea, but real life lived, fence building, being a church together, living in our lives. Wherever we are, God is there present.